Welcome to the Future of Life Institute podcast. My name is Gus Ducker. This is a special episode of the podcast featuring Nathan Labenz interviewing Jaan Tallinn. Jaan is the founder of Skype and a co-founder of the Future of Life Institute. Nathan is the founder of Waymark, which is an AI video creation company, and he's also the co-host of the Cognitive Revolution podcast. I really enjoy listening to that podcast because of Nathan's careful approach to discussing both the enormous upside and the potential risks of AI. If you're new to that podcast, I recommend starting with episode 15 on GPT-4 and economic transformation and episode 31 on the moats of top AI companies. And without further ado, here is Nathan Labenz interviewing Jaan Tallinn.
Our guest today is Jaan Tallinn. Jaan is a technologist, entrepreneur, and investor whose unique life journey has intersected with some of the most important social and technological events of our collective lifetime. Born in 1972 in then-Soviet Estonia, Jaan was 17 years old when the Berlin Wall fell, and he quickly became a video game entrepreneur. Years later, he created Kazaa, the famous P2P file-sharing platform that, at its peak, accounted for half of all internet traffic. From there, he went on to co-found Skype, which eventually sold to eBay in 2005 for $2.5 billion, and for years remained the most successful internet company founded outside of the United States. Circa 2009, Jaan came across Eliezer Yudkowsky's AI risk writing, which he found extremely persuasive and which inspired him to dedicate his time, resources, and personal credibility to existential risk mitigation, with a particular focus on AI. Jaan has since invested in nearly 180 startups, including dozens of AI application layer companies and some half-dozen startup labs that focus on fundamental AI research. Those include DeepMind, Anthropic, and most recently, Conjecture. He's done all this in an effort to support the teams that he believes most likely to lead us to AI safety, and to have a seat at the table at organizations that he worries might take on too much risk. He's also founded several philanthropic nonprofits, including the Future of Life Institute, which recently published the open letter calling for a 6-month pause on the development of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. With so much happening in AI right now, I decided to touch on Jaan's personal story and to discuss Eliezer's baseline AI safety worldview only briefly in the first part of today's conversation. Instead, we focused on the current state of AI development and safety, including Jaan's expectations for possible economic transformation, what catastrophic failure modes worry him most in the near term, how likely he believes next-generation systems like GPT-5 are to literally end the world, how big of a bullet we dodged with the training of GPT-4, whether in some sense we are lucky that language models are softer and slower than alternative AI paradigms, which organizations really matter for immediate term pause purposes, to what extent those organizations are currently coordinating or slowing down already, how AI race dynamics are likely to evolve over the next couple of years, what Jaan and his team hoped to accomplish by calling for a 6-month pause, and finally, how it's gone and how he's feeling about it all now. If nothing else, I hope this conversation makes it clear that the pausers are not merely Luddites who have never built and don't understand technology. On the contrary, Jaan's personal achievements, world-class investment portfolio, and evident optimism for an AI-enabled future, should we manage to build one safely, show that at least some of our most sophisticated and accomplished thinkers take existential risks from AI extremely seriously. With that, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jaan Tallinn. Jaan Tallinn, welcome to the Cognitive Revolution.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you. You have been I think, quiet but major player in the development of AI over the last 10 or so years now. And I want to give people just a very quick kind of overview of who you are and the role you've played, and then kind of jump to the future, which is the present, and talk about all the things that have happened in the last few months, as well as the call that you recently participated in putting out as part of the Future of Life Institute to call for this 6-month pause in the development of large scale models. So a lot to cover. The world is moving faster than ever, it seems. But maybe just give us a little bit of an intro to yourself as an investor in AI companies. You can tell a little bit if you want about the story of how you came to be in position to invest in AI companies, but really super interested in how you have managed to become an investor in so many leading companies and the philosophy that supports that.
So skip over the period of becoming an entrepreneur, running my own games company, then getting into development of peer-to-peer technology that culminated with Skype. And then at the end of my Skype career, stumbled upon Eliezer Yudkowsky's writings and going like, holy hell, what the thing is, what is the world that I've been born into? And having a meeting with Eliezer, like almost exactly 14 years ago, where I kind of tried to poke at his arguments, didn't find any holes. And then I thought, okay, how can I help? Sent them some money, but I think more importantly, started to taking those arguments, turning around, and presenting those arguments to people who would want to have some brand behind the person who is like making the arguments. And that's how basically the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk got started, where I convinced my co-founder Hugh Price there that these topics are important. And Max Tegmark, I think he already was kind of like very primed to these arguments, but that's how the Future of Life got started, Future of Life Institute. And the other strategy that I deployed was, okay, yeah, I already was like a bit of an investor, and I thought that perhaps I could kind of use my brand to sort of get a foot in the door in like various companies or developing potential dangerous things. So I did invest in a bunch of AI companies just to, I always had this dilemma of not wanting to kind of directly accelerate them. So I tried to not be like majority investor or anything, but I just enough to have a voice. And then basically it kind of, with DeepMind, I actually had to like walk up to Demis at the conference, and that's how we kind of started talking, and eventually became friends. I still catch up with him like every second time I'm in London or so. But like, and then once I already was investor in DeepMind and eventually a board member, like getting the ear of other AI companies became easier. So it's kind of like has been like just worked my way up, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of VCs would be extremely envious of your deal flow. So I want to get back to that a little bit more in a second, but let's just go to the Eliezer moment for a second. So you said this was 14 years ago. So this takes us back to circa 2009. At the time, the deep learning revolution hasn't even really started yet. It's at that point, a kind of highly, you may object to this, but I would say for me, I read it as a highly speculative yet very compelling thought about what might happen. And, the arguments there was a lot of detail to be filled in where it was like, well, we have this, insane amount of compute and like, we're probably going to figure out how to use it. And then that probably goes very bad for us. So how did you understand, or like, what do you think is kind of the strongest version of that original argument? And then what have been the biggest changes to that worldview in the intervening time?
Yeah, there are like many ways to frame things, frame the problem. Sometimes I've been kind of asking people two questions, like A, can you program? And B, do you have children? And then I get like 4 different kind of framings or approaches how I can explain the situation with AI. Like one sort of simple argument is that look, there is a reason why chimpanzees are not determining the future and haven't been determining the future for like a long time, if ever. And humans are, but perhaps not for long, because we are working furiously to get rid of that advantage that we have over as the kind of like the apex species on this planet. So once you kind of realize that AI will likely not stop at human level, there is this unfortunate narrative, especially that's very widespread in Asia, where a lot of people think that like we are going to make AI smarter and smarter up to the point where it becomes conscious, and then it's just like us. Then it's just like other people, and we need to kind of integrate them, give it voting rights and whatnot. Whereas I think this is just completely illusionary tale. It will probably not be conscious. It will just be very competent, and competence and consciousness, they might be related somehow, but probably not. So we will have just control over the future yanked from our hands. So that's, I think, is for me compelling enough story.
Yeah. So the linchpin there is we're the boss of the world because we're the smartest thing around. And if we change that, there's a pretty good chance that we may not be the boss of the world anymore. And not only that, but we really, at this point, as things are starting to come online, we don't have a great understanding of what the new boss would look like, or what it might want, or even how to conceptualize, things like want in the context of its internal workings. So anything you would object to in my kind of very brief extension? And then, how has your mindset shifted also from the kind of, largely purely theoretical 2009 Eliezer arguments versus today, where we're in this world of large language models, obviously, but also, increasingly multimodal large language models and, agent style systems like a Gato, that can do all sorts of things. How has the actual development of the technology changed how you think about it?
Yeah, so many things to say about that. First of all, I think I just agree the way you phrase things. Sometimes I've been saying that, look, we are seeing the tail end, possibly last years, of something like 100,000 year period during which humans were the boss on this planet. And it could be even more extreme. It's unclear if evolution will continue, if self-replicators will continue once you have AI just completely taking the solar system to down to the atom levels and rebuilding it, and the rest of the universe. So it might even be tail end of a 4 billion year period. So how my thinking has changed? Yeah, there has been this abstract argument that look, if we just continue on this trend, we're kind of accelerating towards a cliff. And I think the current situation is that we seem to be starting to see the shape of the cliff through the fog. It's possible that it is still a mirage and false alarm, and things will kind of level out, and we need some new paradigms. But the current situation is it seems more likely than not that this is it. And when it comes to general trend, I think it has been very unfortunate in AI research with some silver linings. The unfortunate trend has been we have gone from kind of more transparent, more understandable paradigms to less and less understandable paradigms. We went from things like expert systems. They're by definition, they were super understandable. People were just interviewing experts and trying to kind of hand code the rules by which experts are making decisions into machine. And that was 80s. It was really big thing in 80s. Then we went to supervised learning, where people were just labeling data in different domains, trying to distinguish numbers. And this is where the deep learning kind of started to shine first. And now we are in unsupervised learning. We just we don't even care much about what data we throw. We just throw a lot of data at AI and have it, ask it to just, figure it out in what kind of universe you are, what kind of heuristics you should apply, what kind of skills you need to learn in order to predict the next token. And that is I call it summon and tame paradigm, which is you just use these multi-100 million large experiments to summon an uncontrollable mind, and then you look at what it looks like and try to tame it. And this kind of works if the mind is not very powerful, but it might not work for very long.
But let's go back and just touch on the investment side for a second, because I think this will help people understand the point of view that you have, right? I mean, it started with a series of blog posts in 2009, but now you're really quite the AI insider. You did a recent interview where you kind of ran through your investment portfolio in more detail, but I thought it was interesting how you split it into kind of two categories. One being like the fundamental AI research type company that you've invested in. I believe there's a half a dozen of those. And then there's kind of the application layer companies. And it sounds like there are dozens, maybe 50 plus of those. It seems like the big research companies would be the ones that would kind of give you more insight into what's going on and what matters most right now. But maybe that's wrong. So could you kind of just give a quick run through of, some of the highlights of the portfolio and, we can get a little sense from that of kind of all the different angles that you have on AI today?
Yeah, I'm actually not the best person to talk about my investments because I have mostly delegated it away to a team of a few people. I kind of still make the final decisions, but my focus really is philanthropy. But yeah, when it comes to investments, the sort of fundamental research, AI research companies, I specifically kind of invested not to make money, but to have some kind of influence over what's happening inside those companies. So they are in some ways kind of adjacent to my philanthropy. And when it comes to applied AI, I think the prospects of applied AI companies are much worse now than they used to be before this large LLM paradigm. But of course, the LLM paradigm is very new. So there was no way to know that in I don't know, 5-10 years ago. But currently, I mean, I think we have had this discussion with you that the big problem with trying to build an applied AI company using the LLM paradigm is that you have to be ready for the rug being pulled out from your next 6 months to a year work by the next generation of LLM, which is a new crop of capabilities that have been bred. So it's in a way this. The more kind of domain specific is the AI competence, the more value there is in building kind of application layers around this competence. Whereas if you just get this increasingly generally competent minds, it's much harder to build applications in a stable way.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about doing this show and talking to all the people that we have is, not to spoil one of our closing questions, but we often ask what AI products people are using today that they recommend to the audience. And I have been really amazed by how few different answers we've heard. Probably 2/3 of people have said well, basically just use, ChatGPT. that's it. We get a couple other mentions, but it has led me to believe that the application layer faces some very serious challenges. And it reminds me of, kind of other hyperscaling platforms that we've seen over the last, couple decades where you build around the edges of them, but the monopolist power is just so big. I do want to ask a little bit more about competing trends between centralization and decentralization, because I don't think it's obvious at all that it plays out as it did for Google and as it did for Facebook this time around. Well, let's just cover, kind of the flagship, maybe that's the wrong word, but the fundamental research company investments. DeepMind was the first. I know that you're also an investor in Anthropic and have supported Aught. I don't know if that's an investment or if that's just a donation. Conjecture is on that list. Who am I missing on the list? And I'm also really interested in terms of the conversations that you've had with founders as somebody, just given your statement, I'm sure you said the same to them. I'm not really doing this to make money. I'm doing it because I want to have your ear in case something important comes up. How do people react to that? Do they say yeah, that's great, I want you to be in that position to have my ear? Or are people sort of I don't know what to make of you? Yeah, maybe you're only investing in aligned people.
Yeah, I found it really, in general, my kind of pitch as an investor to deep tech companies is that, look, I'm investing my own money. I don't have a boss, right? So, and I have like a sizable philanthropic operation. So if I can kind of do good by walking away from profits, I can do that in a way that like VCs are, at least for them, it's harder to do that because they manage other people's money. And like for them, it's kind of like, in some ways, like LPs are their bosses. So like I will be on the side of founders if they think that like there's like if they feel like uneasy. I'm not gonna push you to take like this defense contract or whatnot, and that this usually kind of goes down pretty well with founders because it's true.
So who am I missing on the list? We got DeepMind, Anthropic, Conjecture, Aught. Who else would you put in that fundamentals bucket?
Aught, I'm actually not an investor in. I have sent some philanthropic money their way though. So yeah, I mean, Vicarious was like a long time investment around the same time than DeepMind, and like a few other kind of AGI groups that are not as well known, like Curious.ai, for example. There is this Improbable.ai, if I forget, if I remember correctly, in UK. It's just like I have like 180 investments or something like that, so I don't quickly recall all the names from them. But yeah, Conjecture, I think very highly of Conjecture. In fact, I kind of, whenever I go to London, I try to hang out in their office because they seem to be like a group that has like the highest respect for AI, in a sense that like this could be like really dangerous, and like the danger is the important part here to focus on, rather than like whatever exciting commercial contracts we can squeeze out of it or something.
So let's talk about that kind of emerging paradigm of danger. I mean, this has obviously been all over the discourse lately with the pause letter and Eliezer's timepiece. And I think broadly speaking, the public is extremely confused because on the one hand, we have Eliezer, and then on the other extreme, we still have people routinely saying like, this is all nothing, this is all just hype and it'll never amount to anything, which seems crazy to me at this point, like almost like self-evidently, this is a big deal, but that is still out there. And, for folks like my parents who don't rush to try ChatGPT, they're just kind of hearing all these different messages from, the media, and it's all just very confusing. So let's start with maybe the neutral or ideally even positive side. People are, throwing around AGI like all over the place. A lot of disagreement, or, probably mostly implicit disagreement on what does that even mean. Maybe we could just start with like, what do you think AI is going to do for us in daily life? We'll then extend to like the dangers that it can pose. But what is your kind of expectation for how AI is going to impact our lives over the next few years?
I think it's really kind of dependent on like how capable the planet is in kind of constraining the large-scale experiments. Because if it turns out that we can't constrain them and slow them down, then we're just going to die. That's my fairly confident prediction. If we can pause, then like a lot of interesting questions come up, because like the GPT level crop of AIs that will kind of continue improving even if we don't do like sort of new generational experiments, breeding experiments, then even those are just could be like super disruptive. Like for example, I wouldn't want to be an art student in the year of like 2023 because like it's possible that the skills that you're learning are somehow can be pivoted into something that there will be societal demand for. But the answer could also be no, there won't be any demand for your skills.
I personally see that extending to a great many domains. We just did a little episode on the possibilities for economic transformation. And one of the things I'm trying to kind of help people understand is I feel like right now we are in this kind of perfect little happy zone. You could call it like the Goldilocks time after the, I don't know if you know the Goldilocks story, but this feels like the level of AI power that is just right, perhaps, in that, 90th percentile on the American bar exam. Like that's a really strong showing. And, that's base model GPT-4 capability, right? When you imagine what that can start to power when it is fine-tuned, when it is integrated with other systems, when it's able to take advantage of its ability, which we've seen demonstrated, to use tools, and that's not yet broadly deployed, but it certainly has been, I think, compellingly demonstrated. Then you add on to that, an even bigger context window that very few have seen. And then on top of that, you've got the multimodal stuff. Like these models the latest models will certainly be able to like browse around the internet and understand websites and, kind of navigate and take actions online. It feels like that is enough on the positive side to create transformation. Really, economic transformation is kind of my baseline scenario at this point. And, we're just at the beginning of kind of the engineering phase of that, the deployment phase, the like social, figuring out of how it's all going to integrate. And it feels like that could be really amazing. And yet at the same time, it seems like still pretty safe to say that it's limited enough in power that it won't become, an out of control problem at this level. So I think that is, one of the things that frustrates me most is when people who focus on AI risk also dismiss the power, because I'm like, you're undermining your own message there. If you dismiss what it can do, then nobody's going to worry about what you are worried about, that it might do. So let's be very clear on like just how capable the systems are. So I like your comment about conjecture having like the highest respect for AI. I think that's something I try to cultivate in myself as well. Do you see that any differently from me? Like, does it feel to you like what we have is enough for economic transformation, or where do you think we are in that?
I have like a lot of confusion about like how economy works in the first place, because I know that there are jobs whose main purpose is to make the boss feel more important. I don't think like these jobs are very vulnerable to AI disruption, because boss would not be would feel less important if that like underling would be replaced by AI. But I don't know how typical that kind of job is in human economy. And also like there is like, I think Eliezer has pointed out that he just doesn't expect any changes from AI before like we all die, because like the rules and regulations in economy have like sort of constrained everything to the degree where you just can't have like innovation that is going to leave like a significant mark on the GDP or like have like a big changes in like, I don't know, construction or something like that. Perhaps he's wrong, but I just I have like a significant uncertainty about. I definitely wouldn't be confident that we're gonna get like massive economic disruption from the current crop of AIs, but it's very plausible that we would, yes.
Yeah, I think what you said about just how much time there is for the transformation to play out definitely makes sense to me. We're on. I've started counting time since the official release of GPT-4. So we're at 4 weeks and 1 day into the GPT-4 era as of today. And I do think it's really worth just kind of reminding ourselves and grounding ourselves in the fact that no previous system that the public had any access to could really do the sorts of high value tasks that GPT-4 can just do. And so we're literally, there's been a lot of growing awareness. There's been, interesting use cases. There's been like copywriting, assistants that have made a lot of money, but there was not an AI on the market until a month ago that had any plausible chance of like giving you quality legal advice or quality medical advice. And now, that is there. And, again, we're just so early in starting to figure out how to use it. So it does seem like that takes a little while, kind of unavoidably. And I just want to remind the listening audience more so than you, like that window has just opened. And, we have no idea what's about to start coming through it economically, let alone in terms of, alien AI overlords. So turning then to the kind of things that you worry about, I think this model of AI strength kind of proceeding through, what appears to be a smooth loss curve, but what actually seems to be happening under the hood is like all these little thresholds of unlocking different discrete capabilities, kind of being passed, one by one, and all of that kind of aggregating. Yes, I love that paper. All of that kind of aggregating to a smooth curve, but actually being like all these little discrete bits. I think that's a really helpful frame. But I want to ask you, like, what are the things that you kind of most worry about? If you could try to make this somewhat vivid for people, what are the big thresholds that you're like, man, I don't know when, but an AI crosses that threshold and we're in real trouble. Like, what are those and how does that play out in your mind?
So it's possible that there are like many such thresholds that we should be worried about. Like one kind of sort of neutral frame to describe what AI is that it's an automated decision-making machine that is A, non-human, and B, it is getting increasingly competent by day. Whenever, as every leader knows, whenever you're delegating something, you're also like giving up some control over the outcome. With that frame, there could be like many domains where we, in order to kind of remain in charge of what happens next, we should not delegate it to non-humans. So we should have, like, as they call it, human in the loop. But like the most obvious one that I can think of, where we are already rushing to delegate things away, is AI development. So like once you have AI LLMs that are able to develop AIs better than any humans researchers can, then basically we have the most capable systems on this planet appearing without any human help and possibly without any human consultation. And then basically, good luck, humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought you were maybe going to say the deception threshold, which is one I hear kind of thrown around most. I mean, it's funny. It's striking for one thing that like that's kind of OpenAI's explicit plan. Their fairly high level, I would say, plan for AI alignment involves ultimately having AIs kind of supervise themselves and refine the data set and hopefully bootstrap into something good. That has never really reassured me that much either. Anthropic also doing something.
Yeah, constitutional AI. That is like specificity. Although this is like kind of AIs constraining AIs rather than AIs developing next generations of AIs. I think this like it's important to kind of distinguish between those two frames.
One big threshold is AI designing, training the next generation of AIs. Pretty hopefully intuitive to see for people how that becomes potentially a runaway problem that we don't have great control over. The deception threshold, kind of outer inner alignment mismatch, it seems like one that a lot of people worry about just as much. Any personal thoughts on that one that you want to share?
Yeah, I think like one thing that I and like alignment community has sort of like learned over the last decade is that the shape of the alignment problem has become like much clearer. Like for example, indeed, this like inner outer alignment dichotomy is something that at least myself I had no idea about. Just like this idea that deep learning paradigm and I would say like machine learning paradigm in general is training AIs by picking essentially random minds out from behavioral classes. So like you're not selecting AIs based on what they want. You're selecting AIs based on how they behave. And like there could be like many motivational structures behind giving certain particular behavior. The most scary one is basically AI realizing that it is being trained and then just like acting out the goal that you're training it for in order to kind of be selected and eventually escape the box.
Yeah, I think that one is hard to get around too, just from the simple observation that we're not super reliable. Anybody who's spent a significant amount of time trying to validate language model output, even just for like a, relatively run-of-the-mill application. Like I've done this at Waymark, right? We're making marketing video content for small businesses. And, really all the stuff we create is with language models. The main thing is write a script for a short commercial for a small business. So it's a pretty narrow domain of space that we need to evaluate. And yet it remains a real challenge to figure out, is this model better than this one? Or, we do a fine tune. How does it compare to the last fine tune? You're getting all these different outputs, and it's just tough. The distributions are overlapping. The rate at which the new model is preferred to the previous one is often fairly low. I've seen published results as low as 11 to 9 ratio, where one is preferred to the other. Even GPT-4 to 3.5 is just 70-30 in terms of preference. So still a full third of the time, people prefer 3.5 in a head-to-head comparison, which kind of blows my mind given how qualitatively better it seems GPT-4 is. So that's just the general problem of validation. But then you add into that mix that we have all these, heuristics and biases that are exploitable. We have these kind of, cognitive gaps that have kind of lingered in our own systems. And, evolution never had a real reason to eliminate all of them, or, never hasn't got around to it yet. And so we're exploitable. Right. And everybody kind of knows that in our daily life. We know that people at a minimum will tell us little white lies to make us feel good, or just to get through a situation a little bit easier. Do you see any promising route to avoiding that sort of exploitable evaluator problem?
Short answer is no. But it's very much open research question. Sort of on a theoretical level, indeed, you would want to somehow kind of hitch a ride on the increasing capabilities of AI when it comes to somehow making it more reliable or more constrained, more predictable in general. I hesitate to say more aligned because my model of Eliezer goes no, you don't point AI towards alignment. That's just a silly thing to do. But yeah, AIs are going to get more capable. Can we somehow get something out of it that is scalable rather than kind of ending in a predictably bad place?
It might be worth just spending a little bit more time too on, again, just kind of how these things might play out. I think Eliezer's spoken very interestingly, compellingly about what happens when you go outside of your distribution of training. And for humans, he just points out that, basically everything in nature is optimized for reproduction, inclusive genetic fitness. And yet the behavior that we observe in ourselves is not at all about, in the modern environment, does not appear to be about maximizing our reproduction. And in fact, we didn't even know that that's what we had been optimized for until relatively recently. So we were out here kind of doing whatever we're doing. It took a few random geniuses to figure out how we had actually kind of been created by nature. And that has had relatively little impact on what anyone has actually done in their day-to-day lives. So would you add anything to that story or observation?
Yeah, just to be more precise, I think we are selected for kind of inclusive genetic fitness, ability to reproduce, and again, because of the same problem that machine learning faces, that we can only select based on behavior or based on results. That selection kind of effectively pulls in a random instantiation of capabilities and motivations that just happen to give you this particular behavior without having any fine-grained control over what these motivations and capabilities actually are. So yes, evolution ended up selecting us in this ancestral environment where we had developed just a bunch of heuristics that were very useful for reproduction in that ancestral environment, but much less so in the modern environment, without like never actually kind of ingraining in us any fundamental understanding what we're being selected for. So the very same process might just replay it when it comes. Very same process might get replayed as we are selecting AIs based on behavior and without any insight on the inner workings of them.
So we could spend hours unpacking all this, and I know you have done that, many times. So we will bracket that for the moment. We've got all these different failure modes. We've got, potentially kind of runaway AI training its own successors in a way that is not clear to us. We've got kind of the deception problem. We've got the fact that we have no reassurance or no reason to believe really at all that the goals that we have for AI will be like represented internally. And so, with a sudden jump in kind of the domain in which the AI can operate, it can be totally outside of training distribution, and, who knows how it might act, just like who would have expected how humans might have acted from, the ancestral environment. So all these things are, pretty big conceptual problems. We don't have good answers to them at the moment. What do you think how does that boil down to a simple worldview for you? Like, what are the odds that you see right now of serious catastrophe happening in, say, the next 2, 5, 10 years? And maybe we could segment that into, given the trajectory that we're on, versus like how we might be able to shift that if, for example, we've took a pause.
Yeah, my current estimate for kind of life-ending disaster is basically 1 to 50% per generation per like 10xing of compute that's being thrown at these experiments. And like currently they are 10xing things in like 6 to 18 months window. So you can kind of calculate from there. I mean, at some point we're going to run out of compute because like there's only so many 10xing you can do. So you can't like you probably can't do like thousands of those. But still, like let's say something like a geometric mean of 1 and 50% is 7%. So with 7% risk to everything, if we continue doing those, we probably can still do like something like 5 or 6 of those. And at that point, we are like more likely dead than not.
Worth taking a second to just let that sink in. Would you have put that same estimate on GPT-4? Like, do you think we just survived a 7% X-risk event with the training of GPT-4?
That is a great question. Like with like hindsight is like, I'm like super anchored now, right? So I really want to say no, but again, like the range is like 7% is like this point estimate, but like I really my uncertainty range is like from 1 to 50%. And like, so the interesting question is like, would I put like less than 1% confidence in GPT not destroying everything, GPT-4 not destroying everything? And probably not. So I think like, yeah, I think it's unreasonable to kind of have at least given the things that I knew with GPT-3 and like everything else and like things that I didn't know, like having a very close look at what's happening at GPT-4 in GPT-4 training, then yeah, I think it would have been unreasonable for me to be less than 1%, or like confident in less than 1% doom from GPT-4.
Honestly, I can't really argue with you there. When I look at when I got my first look at it, it had already finished pre-training and initial reinforcement learning. And this was, the 6 months ago when they kind of finished the first version before any of the safety work. And obviously there was the whole red teaming effort and everything else. It definitely hit me pretty hard that like, wow, this is a significant leap. And now you look at all the papers that have kind of come out characterizing it in the wake of the official release. The thing that I kind of keep coming back to is we have these smooth curves, but then you have on individual behaviors, you have these sudden jumps. So the one they published in the technical report, which isn't such a big deal, obviously, but maybe indicative of things that could happen in the future on more problematic dimensions, is the hindsight bias failure, where it had previously been observed, I think by Anthropic, that bigger models suffered more from hindsight bias. And so it was an example of an inverse scaling law where the behavior was getting worse with bigger models. And then all of a sudden with GPT-4, that problem is totally fixed and there is no hindsight bias, and it basically just scores like 100% perfection on those hindsight bias problems, which, by the way, are basically like scenarios where you had a good bet available to you. You like took the good bet and you lost, in an unlikely way. And so the question then is like, should you have taken the bet? And people might say, in the hindsight bias would be, well, no, if I lost, then I shouldn't have done it. When in reality, like you actually had, all good reasons to do it. So 3.5, was actually getting this wrong more often than like 3, and more often than some smaller models. But then again, boom, somehow some unlock has happened in the course of training. And it was probably never registered on the smooth loss curve, which, mostly looks smooth. But all of a sudden, this behavior now is like totally strong. I would say, probably safe to say superhuman, in the sense that obviously we create these measures because some of us struggle with the hindsight bias. And so, yeah, you wonder, okay, if that's those kinds of things, we do see those kind of sudden jumps in capability in the context of GPT-4, like, another 10, 50, 100x compute scale up. It's predictable that it will bring more of them, but it's very unclear like what exactly they would be. So 1 to 50% across these, big scale up training runs. How do you think that plays out across different groups that might be running those processes? I don't know if you may or may not want to go, to kind of specific names, but like, obviously there's a few leading groups that can plausibly scale up another, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude right now. Do you think that's like equally reckless for any of them to do? Or do you think some have a better handle on how to do that responsibly than others?
I mean, there are always like some differences in various dimensions. Just like hanging out in Anthropic feels materially different than hanging out in DeepMind, where I both hanged out at both places and like a little bit at OpenAI. So like there's certainly like a much more kind of safety culture in Anthropic. Does that justify risking everything, like killing everyone? Is like, I don't think so. So it's like in some ways these are like second order. In my view, they're like second order effects. How kind of like safety conscious your group is compared to the fact that you're taking just massive risks with everyone's lives right now.
So how do you think about? You mentioned 2 companies that I have serious questions about. I guess let's go DeepMind first. I've been kind of waiting for like a Gato 2 to drop. And it seems like, as I check my imaginary watch, like it seems like that is probably due right around now, unless there's some sort of pause or like somebody's kind of thought better of doing a Gato 2, or maybe it just didn't work for some reason, but that seems unlikely because it seems like almost everything is, quote unquote, working these days. Do you have a sense for like what is going on at DeepMind? Demis published a Time article. It feels like a long time ago, much more, reserved and moderated tone for a Time article than Eliezer's more recent one, but still pretty striking to see founder, CEO of DeepMind saying, we need to think about slowing down. Are they slowing down?
I mean, I don't know. I don't have like that much visibility into DeepMind. I have heard about them deliberately being more cautious about publishing things, which is like empirical thing that I haven't verified. Is that actually true? But it feels that they are more careful now when it comes to publishing. in some ways we're kind of in a lucky world that all the big free labs, they are safety conscious to the level, at least to the level of not dismissing the risks, in a way that, for example, Jan LeCun or Andrew Ng are just completely dismissing the risks. It's not obvious that the world should be in a way that, like, for example, I've been praising Sam Altman for saying the things that he says about the risks, and he's been very explicit about the massive dangers that humanity is facing from AI. So like another question is like to what degree does this safety consciousness actually kind of constrain the actions of these companies that have their own incentives as like non-human optimization engines and like necessarily some hard to lead. Like, I mean, the leaders of AI companies, they have like a bunch of conflicting requirements that they want to satisfy, especially in DeepMind, where it's like one big constraint is that they're not a company; they're like a subsidiary of Google. So it's in some ways I'm kind of sympathetic to them trying to navigate that must be complex set of constraints.
I think you're right. I found myself saying this too. Like, it is easy to imagine people that are a lot more cavalier, running the frontier projects. So I'm thankful that there does seem to be a profound awareness and real seriousness of approach across the biggest companies. In some ways, I also feel like we might be in a lucky scenario in that language models are taking off, and yet they're very kind of soft edged AI. They kind of also run slow. And I contrast that to what, I think maybe Eliezer sort of had in mind 14 years ago, or what DeepMind was, seemingly closest to. If I had to say, 5 years ago, who was closest to AGI, I would have said DeepMind, with all of their game playing, agent learning agents, all that kind of stuff. Those notably achieve Alpha Zero and all that, right? They notably achieve dramatically superhuman performance in obviously narrow domains. They also run really fast, and they're trained, if anything, in an even more alien way, where AlphaZero just plays itself, right, in all these games, and kind of learns from that, and doesn't even need to see the database of human games, and therefore when it shows up with superhuman skill, it's also kind of an alien superhuman skill, and you get these dramatically surprising moves that no human would ever have made. In contrast, I feel like language models, everything has pros and cons, right? They certainly have insane surface area, but their kind of softness and slowness does seem like it might be a real advantage relative to a more kind of hardened, faster agent type of model. How do you think about that? Do you think we are lucky with LLMs, or am I just naive in my optimism?
Yeah, I think the big trend has been negative in terms of going towards more and more black boxy and kind of uncontrollable training regimes. Going from expert systems to supervised to unsupervised learning. On the other hand, there are a few things definitely that we can sort of got lucky with. I would say the prime one is the fact that you actually do need a lot of compute to do the pre-training of large language models, which means that there are only small number of organizations on the planet who can do that, and those training runs are potentially very conspicuous. Only half jokingly say that the planet is now breeding alien minds in a way that aliens can see, because very plausibly you can see those energy expenditures from space. So that's one lucky thing about LLMs. And the other thing, I agree that the speed at which, or the slowness rather, at which they kind of process things is an advantage. But this is a temporary advantage, I'm pretty sure, because like human brains themselves are like offer like a concept, proof of concept that like, no, you don't have to be that slow. This is like just like pure inefficiency. And the other thing is, like once you have like some kind of feedback process where the like LLMs will start developing AIs, those AIs might no longer be LLMs.
What do you make of this current moment? I mean, this is something that's really just popped up and gone kind of widespread in just the last 2 weeks. But there's all these kind of projects to create, one of them is called Baby AGI, another is called Auto GPT. And essentially, they're taking a language model, putting it in a loop, and kind of giving it, the ability to like have a goal, delegate to itself, go through these like thinking, reasoning, planning steps, then start to use tools. And again, like, getting around the kind of hard limit of a context window through some sort of self-delegation. I'm struck by that as kind of, potentially the next convergence between those two paradigms in some ways. And it also seems to open up the potential for a kind of self-play reinforcement learning. Like these agents are not very good right now. And so if you go on Twitter, you'll see people being like, this is so amazing. Look what this thing can do. And then you'll see other people being like, it fails way too much. These are not useful. It's going to be a long time before they are useful. But I kind of think those people are wrong in the sense that this is the first language model paradigm that feels like relatively easy to evaluate in a fairly open domain. Because you can kind of know, like, did the thing, book you the flight or whatever, right? Or did it just get hung up on some API error that it never solved? And it seems like they're going to learn pretty quick from this like massive little agentization and, kind of exploring paradigm that's just been set up. Like, how worrying of a development is that for you?
There are like several frames to look at this thing, and these frames will kind of like give you almost a very kind of opposing judgment about the situation. For example, one very positive frame to look at this is that like it's great that society is like kind of like poking, and rattling and poking these current models to see like what are the extremes that you can push them to. Because like they are not very competent, and like by having those kind of experiments with like chaos GPT and whatnot, we as a civilization will actually learn like how bad things could be if things would be scaled up. So if you take like chaos GPT and put like GPT-6, I claim you might not be safe at all anymore. On the other hand, like you can take this frame that like when, I don't know, people like Jaan Tallinn, etc. have been saying like there's nothing to worry about from AI because like it's not gonna be agently, and even if it's going to be agently, like it would be just stupid to kind of install some like self-preservation and just kind of like bad goals. Like we're not going to do that. It's like, no, we absolutely are. Like a fraction of humanity has a death wish, so it's like that these like kind of clear empirical demonstrations that like if something really bad can be done with AI, it will be done.
Yeah, it's a big world, and it's pretty easy. I mean, that's the other thing that's amazing. Like, I think the first commit of the Baby AGI project, which I believe has been the #1 trending project on GitHub over the last couple of weeks, alongside like a couple other very similar projects. The first commit, I think, was 105 lines of code. And that's all it takes, a couple clever prompts and and kind of a loop, and you've got yourself a little agent, and it might not do much yet. But given the model, the barrier to, creating some sort of semi-embodied, autonomous version of that is proving to be extremely low. So yeah, I don't think we will not be able to rely on the good discretion of users in the long term. Certainly probably not more than for a few days with the release of any major new system. You mentioned a minute ago, you said 3 kind of leading groups. And I wanted to ask you how you think about like who is at the frontier and who is maybe going to be at the frontier over the next few years. I assume the 3 you had in mind, you didn't specifically say OpenAI, but obviously they're in that group. DeepMind was the other that we were discussing. And then I am guessing you're thinking Anthropic would be the third.
I think DeepMind and Google, they're kind of like, could be kind of interchangeable. I kind of hear that they are kind of, even publicly mentioned that they're somehow kind of joining forces when it comes to this LLM race.
So nobody else you feel like is close enough at this point? Like if it's a coordination problem of who actually, who are you calling on to pause? I mean, you're calling on everyone to pause, but it sounds like it's really those three organizations that you're calling on for a pause.
Yeah, I think they are like the first, so-called like first tier when it comes to doing like the most dangerous experiments. But like, of course, then you have like the second tier. I think Eliezer has this kind of related law, like the Moore's law of mad science, that I kind of forget exactly how it was framed. It was like every 2 years, the IQ needed to destroy the world drops by like 1 or 2 points. So it's as the hardware companies, mostly NVIDIA at this point, will throw in more and more capable and cheap computing cycles at the market, the world destroying capability will be in a larger number of hands.
Interesting to think about how that evolves over the next few years. Do you think if you imagine that, let's say we do enact a pause and then, meanwhile, NVIDIA keeps shipping and people keep kind of doing, fundamental, which notably the letter explicitly goes out of its way to say, like, we're not saying all AI research should stop or that, you can't build your small models or fine tune things for your use cases and so on. So if we imagine a world where there is kind of a pause on these high-end experiments, but hardware continues to ship and generally speaking, like the field is not shut down, do you have a guess for how many folks would be in the kind of, would be able to do a GPT-5 type project if they chose to in, say, 5 years?
Well, 5 years is a super long time. Yeah.
I'm with you on that, by the way. I don't even try to guess things 5 years out, so I shouldn't ask.
Yeah. 2 years, I mean, yeah, probably a dozen is something that kind of like I just pull out of thin air. If I would think about it, then I would probably have like it's probably less than 100, more than 10. Perhaps closer to 10 than to 100 is my answer in 2 years.
And so some of those we can kind of fill in pretty obviously, right? Like Meta seems like it would be a very natural candidate. Microsoft, I mean, they have the OpenAI partnership, but they certainly also have their own big research division. Presumably Apple, has the resources to get into that game. Maybe even like a Tesla. I mean, they're focused on other things at the moment, seemingly, but they also have the bot. The Tesla bot is going to need some sort of, fairly general intelligence to help it walk around and talk to people and pick stuff up. Any other kind of specific actors that you think would be likely entrants there? And then how do you think about kind of the international scene? Like, is there anything coming out of Europe? And obviously then everybody starts to think about China too.
Yeah, I was going to say that like the obvious, like in 2 year perspective, yeah, you should kind of like start also like looking at like non-US actors in Europe, where it's kind of, compute is much more available. And then also China. I think they're like one sort of obvious counter argument that we're getting with when it comes to like calling for the pause is that like, what about China? And like my answer there is that like currently China does not seem to be in the race, at least not as intensely as the leading US labs are in a race between themselves. And second, like sort of almost like culturally, Chinese seem to be like much less keen on pulling a Bing and just like unleashing uncontrollable mind on their territory. I mean, only half jokingly say that like in China, if you do that as a tech CEO, that might get you disappeared. But yeah, in the longer run of like 2 or more years, it will become like more and more important to get some kind of international agreements that we already have in nuclear, for example, in place for compute.
on the China front, I totally agree. It's like, I don't know why we would assume, given the posture that the Chinese government has taken toward technology over the last few years, that this is the technology that they're just going to throw caution to the wind on, right? I mean, they've functionally shut down their entire video game industry and limited it to, as I understand it, just like a few hours on like a couple weekend nights per week is like all that like video game companies, I think, can even operate in China now. We should fact check me on that, but that's what I understand to be the case.
And online learning, I understand, is also being mostly.
And that one is fascinating too, because like, who could object to online learning? But my sense is that they intervene there on like a state level because they feel like there is an unhealthy market dynamic developing where people are like working too hard on these, on these like whatever standardized test measures and like putting way too much resources in this. And it's like gone past the point of like societal benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually a chairman of a online language teaching company, an Estonian company that has like big linguist. Yes. Oh yeah, you know it, of course. And like one thing that they learned in Japanese market is that there's like a massive English teaching market in Japan, but people don't care about learning the language. They just want to pass the tests in order to get like better employment options. So like you're not like, this is like, as a language teaching company in Japan, your job is not to teach the language. Your job is to get people get good test scores, which is a very different job. So I suspect that something like that was also happened in China.
I would not take personally. I'm not ready to say by any means that I want to, fully subscribe to Xi Jinping thought or live under the technology regime there. But it does seem like we're jumping to a conclusion way too quickly when we say like, well, if we don't do it, they will, and that'll be worse. But leaving that aside for a second, just coming back to ourselves. The other big thing that has come out this last week or so is apparent, and I take that it's probably legitimate, a sort of leaked fundraising document from Anthropic that says that they are planning to raise $5 billion or so and kind of see the next 2-3 years as like super critical, planning to do like next gen models. They're kind of immediately moving into a GPT-5, type scaling regime. It sounds like the model itself, supposedly is going to cost like $1 billion to train. And then they say, again, this is all according to reporting. I haven't seen the deck, but those that fall behind in the 25-26 timeframe may never be able to catch up. So when I heard that, I was like, man, that does not sound like a company that's about to pause. It doesn't sound like, it does sound like a company that's kind of in the race now. How are you viewing that news? And I don't know if you have any, inside view. I obviously wouldn't ask you to, to share anything that you shouldn't, but what should the public make of that, update from supposedly like the most safety centric leading lab that there is?
Yeah, I mean, like to the degree that this thing was accurate, which again I can't comment on because I'm investor in Anthropic and board observer as well. I think to the degree that it was accurate, it is strong evidence that there is like a massive race happening between the US companies that is going to get us killed. So like, can we stop that race, please?
What exactly is the thought process, knowing that this group came from OpenAI? They, high level description that I've heard is, they felt like it was becoming too commercial. They wanted to be more focused on a safety first type of approach. And that's been, 2 years or whatever. Now this, like, what? The only thing I can come up with is people must be thinking, we'll do a better job than they will do. So therefore we should do it before they do it, because if we don't, then they'll do it or they'll do it worse. And it seems like maybe everybody's thinking that. I kind of model like OpenAI to some degree that way as well. Is that how you think about the decision makers, or what do you think they're thinking?
So I think like one very informative public piece of information is like Future of Life Institute podcast with Dario and Daniela Amadei. that was like during COVID, about a year ago, in early 22. Well, basically, kind of like they explain like what the approach of Anthropic is, and as far as I know, it is it is true. What I said in this podcast is basically like train the frontier models and then basically do alignment in an empirical fashion while having access to frontier models. And the claim is that it is exactly because of these emergent capabilities. There is only so much you can do using sort of not state-of-the-art models because in some ways, as the models get more competent, they also become easier to interact with. And just the fact that we have language models in the first place, like that is in some ways, I think you pointed it out, is can also like serve as a good interface when it comes to alignment. So that is kind of Anthropic's thesis to have like this latest models and then basically use those to do like state of the art alignment that is kind of like empirically tied to the actual objects that we have. Now, of course, the big question there is like how many generations you can do that for. Because like the pre-training is like largely uncontrolled, unsupervised process. How many generations we can do the pre-training safely, not to mention things like leaks to elsewhere of the resulting weights. So I think it's a genuine dilemma. It's in some ways, I think Anthropic's framing and perspective makes a lot of sense because indeed, like the largest language, you can get more useful alignment work done with the latest crop of the large language models. On the other hand, like each training imposes like some risk. Again, in my estimate, 1 to 50% risk of complete annihilation of the planet. How do you navigate that trade-off? It's not obvious, and I don't think there's current enough kind of thinking into that trade-off.
Again, it feels like there's some sort of game theory element here where it's like it seems like they're doing it because they believe someone else is doing it still on some level, right? If they roughly share your view and they're like, well, the only way we can do the alignment work is if we have access to the latest models, then a good counter argument would be, if it were true, well, nobody else is going to create these if you don't. So maybe you should just sit tight too. And then we can all kind of, study what we have. We don't need another frontier just yet. So it still seems like it is fair to say there that like on some level, they feel like their hand is forced. Like they can't not do it because they're either in the game or they're out of the game, but the game will continue regardless. It seems to be the model that's kind of implicit in that decision-making.
Yeah, I mean, there are like a few models that are sort of consistent with evidence, but that definitely is one model because of like these race pressures. They're going to feel that like if they don't have access to the latest generation of models, they their prospects of actually doing alignment are significantly hampered. So that's like the positive way of framing things. The letter even I think explicitly mentioned that one goal of this letter is to call for this timeout in this race that indeed has a non-trivial game theoretic element.
I think your most recent kind of fundamental AI research investment is in conjecture. And if I understand correctly, and I may be wrong on this, but I don't get the sense that they are planning to try to train a GPT-5 in the short term. How are you thinking about kind of their contribution, their strategy? It seems like they take a different approach where they don't feel like they have to create the frontier models in order to do something useful.
Yeah, I am much more positive about conjecture's approach in terms of safety capabilities trade-off. They still train language models, but they do not do kind of latest language models. Their goal is to kind of compose less capable language models in a way that kind of makes for a more predictable structure. So you don't risk the world during the pre-training phase and have a more, in some ways, kind of more old school approach to AI rather than this summon and tame approach.
Yeah, interesting. We just did an episode with on Andreas and Jungwan from Aught, and they have a very similar, kind of outlook too, where composition of models, the sort of traceability of all the logic, atomization of the different decisions and operations to try to create, some sense of kind of designed control, into the system from the beginning. Sounds like conjecture is kind of on a similar line of thinking.
Yep. And I think like if we manage to get the pause in this like game theoretic race, assuming it is a game theoretic race, there's also like some frame that says that no, this is like just apocalyptic death cults trying to end the world. This is like the least charitable frame. But if we could get a pause, then like I do think that like there's like this almost automatic pressure to get like more competence out of the minds that we already have trained. And part of it is just like to have like a better understanding, a better composition of the capabilities that we already have. Because like one important bit, like as a lot of your listeners probably know, is that you have like this training phase that is like much more expensive than actually the inference phase. So like once you have like spent a lot of compute on training, once you finish the training, you have a lot of ability to run many instances of the minds that you just trained.
So let's talk about the letter. So you guys, obviously, we've covered a decade of your thinking and investment on this subject, and now we get to the point where, okay, GPT-4 is released. It is, closing in on human expert performance in a great many domains. It does seem to me like it's quite unclear, like what the next generation of that would bring. Obviously, you guys are thinking, something very similar there. So how did this project come about for a letter? Like, how did you guys settle on a 6-month pause? What was the process like of like trying to bring a broad coalition together? And was this something that you guys like actually thought might happen? Or, is it kind of intended to be a conversation starter? Like, how do you think about this project?
Good questions. I remember we had a FLI catch-up call on March 21st. Less than a month ago. And we were kind of like, we had already observed that there are like significant voices like in the public. I mean, the Gesra Klein's article in New York Times had come out where he kind of explicitly compared the current AI race to like summoning minds. And I think Harari's article also was published around that time, where he kind of was concerned about LLMs plugging into the operating system of civilization, which is like about language, and which operates on the language level. And then like numerous discussions, sort of private discussions that are very concerned about the current race, including with people in the labs themselves. So we thought that, okay, perhaps like one valuable thing that FLI could do is to try to create some kind of common knowledge that, yes, like a bunch of people are worried, and now basically create a situation where like those people know that other people are also worried, and the other people know that the other people know, etc. And we thought that, okay, we have some experience with open letters, so perhaps we should like try to draft one up. And of course, like our previous open letters had something like 1,000 or less than 1,000 signatures. So like one thing that we got just completely blown away by was just the reaction. Like kind of immediate in the first few days, we got like tens of thousands of signatures, and we had like technical problems because of that. So yeah, like when it came to kind of drafting the letter, there were like multiple considerations. Like one consideration was just speed. So like clearly, if we would have had like several weeks to work on it, then it would have been much better. But like it was like sort of done much in the spirit of like, not let's not have the perfect to be the enemy of the good, and let's draft up something that feels okay to put out. Indeed, like the 6 month number was like one thing that kind of was put in and then taken back out of from different versions of the draft. And the argument finally that kind of won over the 6 month thing was that like one question we get like, so like why 6 months? Why? What can you do with a 6 month? What can you demonstrate with what would 6 month pause buy us? Like one important thing that people don't necessarily realize that 6 month pause would buy us is confidence that we can pause. And so, and like in that sense, it's better to have a proposal that calls for 6 month pause to fail than a proposal that calls for indefinite pause to fail. Because like the indefinite pause situation, people go, oh yeah, if it would have been 6 months, of course we could have done it. But like because indefinite, like nobody would pause indefinitely, right? So that was like the final kind of like reason that we thought, okay, let's put in 6 months and see what happens.
Yeah, I thought Zvi had some great analysis of this in the first. Somebody who also works with a speed premium that I appreciate had some just, I thought, pretty ultimately simple, but still very wise analysis. That's just like, if you feel like you're going to need coordination in the future, it makes sense to start building it now. And if you can only get a little bit going at first, then you kind of take what you can get and you hope to build on that foundation.
Yeah, the other kind of like really big consideration that kind of fed into the open letter is that like there's a lot of reasonable discussion that happens like in the labs and even between the racing labs about the need to kind of like coordinate, the need to pause, need to be careful, and like people have been kind of public about it, etc. But like there's like always like one missing component. The component is like when. They always say, I think Scott Alexander wrote a good article about OpenAI's like AGI and beyond statement, where he kind of also pointed out that like, yeah, they're saying a lot of nice things, which is great. I mean, honestly, it's good. But they don't say when. And like this should make you a little bit suspicious at least. And so therefore, like the one of the rationales for the letter is that, how about now?
So I want to go through some additional kind of questions that I've seen floating around in the discourse, but what is your sense of kind of how the reaction has been? Obviously, there's been a ton of signatures, even one notable CEO of, a company that I would say is like close to a leading lab, which is Ahmad from Stability, signed on to it. I thought that was fascinating. As far as I know, it's been pretty quiet reaction from the kind of three main groups, that are the ones who are going to either pause or not pause, for something beyond GPT-4. So what do you make of the reaction from them? Like, there's been no public statements as far as I know. And has there been any kind of private or, sort of confidential reassurance? Has there been any reaction from the leading labs?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Sam Altman like said publicly that like he's kind of like with the spirit of the letter, like appreciates the spirit of the letter or something. But then there was of course a but. I don't even remember what the but exactly was. But yeah, like DeepMind definitely hasn't said anything, nor has Anthropic. Although like I just today read Jack Clark's newsletter, Import AI, where he kind of like mentions the letter and also says like why he didn't mention it last week. So there's like some reactions, but like also kind of like want to be careful here in the sense that I don't want to like create some self-fulfilling prophecies. I would say that the possibilities are definitely very much open at this stage for the letter somehow catalyzing an actual pause, but it's like double-digit uncertainties both ways.
Cool. That's actually more positive of a response, albeit minimal, than I had expected or even understood. I haven't seen that Sam Altman tweet. I'll have to dig into that. And
Yeah, I don't think it was a tweet. I think I hope I'm not just like he didn't see it in my dreams or something. But I think it was actually a comment in some news article about the letter.
Humans too suffer from hallucination at times, so we'll fact check ourselves.
Indeed, we do.
So okay, so you guys put this out there. Now people start to say all kinds of stuff, right? The thing that I think is kind of most like you didn't finish reading the letter, but which is definitely worth giving you a chance to kind of respond to is, well, all the letter says is a pause. It doesn't ask for anything else, so it's stupid because like, what are we supposed to do? Again, like you can read the letter for yourself. There are definitely some things that it calls for, but just kind of, obviously it's a big tent, committee sort of document. Just zeroing in on your own, priorities. What do you think are like the most important, tangible, concrete things that we could do over, say, a 6-month time frame, such that maybe even you would be comfortable, ending the pause? Like, I guess, top priorities, and if those top priorities happened, would that be enough in your mind to then end the pause and like train a GPT-5?
So one thing that will sort of like happen automatically is that we will get more experience with the crazy situation now that we're in, which is that we have, I think Joshua Bengio put it, that now we have AIs out there in the internet that can pass a Turing test. And that is a novel situation. And I think would be much smarter 6 months from now than we are now, because 6 months will be a long period, long chunk of time when it comes to living with aliens on your planet. I don't know what we're gonna learn, but hopefully we just like are smarter in the autumn than we are in the spring. But like when it comes to like more concrete things. Yeah, there's like, Neil Nanda, a researcher in UK who has worked with DeepMind as well as Anthropic, has this blog post called 200 Open Problems in Mechanistic Interpretability. So like, there's like so much work that can be done with even like the previous generation of models, not to say anything about the latest generation. So there's like so much kind of alignment work. And just opening up those black boxes and trying to understand what makes them tick. How can we get any guarantees about what the next generation is going to do? So again, with research and with kind of lived experience, I hope we will be in a much better. I hope we will be in a much better, but like realistically, I just say that we're going to be in a better place 6 months from now.
That doesn't sound to me like you would expect just on general kind of improvement to get to a point where you would then say, okay, let's end the pause and do the next generation. Is there anything, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but maybe framing the question slightly differently, if we abstracted away from the 6-month time frame and said, like, are there concrete structures of some sort that we could put in place that would, on any timeline, kind of give you enough confidence or reassurance that, again, you can say like, okay, it seems like we're now in a decent enough place that you would personally be comfortable going ahead with a next generation training?
I still like the big question is like, how much risk are we okay taking? And I'm not saying this risk should be zero, because there is always like this background risk of existential risk. We could be hit by asteroid. There's a certain probability that like this call will not end because the planet will be hit by like some, probably not an asteroid because we can see this coming, but by comet. That is kind of harder to see, I understand. So like we shouldn't like get the risk to zero, but like perhaps there are, like if there is this pause and like associated realization that like these experiments are considered like too reckless by society, hopefully this will create some kind of incentive gradient for the companies themselves to figure out how to make them in a more responsible manner and more legible manner. So there's this project in ARC, Alignment Research Center in Berkeley, led by Paul Cristiano, called evals, like evaluating models about like what are the things that they could in principle do, other things that they're still kind of incompetent on. I mean, you can have like multiple opinions about this, but or different opinions about this, but like there's like a generalization of this. Like, is it possible to replace the current blind, as far as I know, training runs with something that you like at every iteration you do some tests that would give you some kind of guarantees about the alien that you're summoning?
Yeah, there's a few other things that I think give me a little bit of hope that they might be developed on a kind of a technical level during that time. There was an interesting paper that came out from, I think this was pretty small scale. Yeah, I believe it was out of Anthropic, where they experimented with doing the pre-training on a human preference data set from the beginning, as opposed to just kind of, random decent quality text off the internet. And it seemed that the upshot of that was that you never had quite as alien of an alien in the first place, on measures of like harmfulness, for example, helpfulness. It stayed much closer throughout the training process to kind of that final post RLHF or RLAIF state that we know now, and never kind of dipped as far into the sort of, just very strange alien territory of general pre-training. So something like that, kind of changing the data set maybe from the get-go, seems interesting. Another recent thing that jumped out to me was somebody just, I think in the last week or two, just published a result where they showed that they were able to increase the size of the model progressively throughout training. It was kind of presented to me as like a efficiency thing. And it does go to show all these things are kind of pros and cons. Everything is dual use. But the net savings on the training flops was like 50%, which is obviously significant enough for people to take notice, even for just purely commercial reasons. But then it seemed to me like, boy, there's something really interesting there where you're creating kind of this seed, kernel, like truly little baby version of the model that is actually just a lot smaller in terms of its parameters. And then you're able to kind of layer on more and more layers, parameters, as you go through the whole training process. It seemed like maybe there would be a way to, zoom in on that small thing and get something kind of working right in like the small, presumably much more interpretable version first before, growing the model itself and kind of just having one big, tangled knot of parameters.
I guarantee that it will not guarantee like safety in the long run, but it might just be enough to reduce the probability of destroying everything in the next generation. So we can actually kind of like do one more step in a way that is much more responsible than the current default.
So one thing that you have not gone to much here is regulation, government intervention. I mean, the letter does call for that. If there can be no pause, then government should step in and insist on one. But you're not putting a lot of, maybe you just haven't got to it yet. But I'm not hearing anything from you that's like government can come in and set up a regime that's going to do much for us. Is that do you have any hope in a sort of government regulatory approach?
Oh yeah, I do. Glad that you asked. This also like reminds me that like Google, in the form of Sundar Pichai, did react to the letter. Like there was a podcast, Hard Fork, New York Times podcast, where he said that like the discussion started by the letter is great, but he thought that like government intervention is necessary here. That is not enough to rely on the labs kind of self-regulating. So like I think like one silver lining that I already mentioned is that like this pre-training is super expensive and super visible, and therefore like kind of the metaphor that I've been using is like the nuclear control, that in nuclear arms you also have like these two phases. One is like the hard step of enriching uranium, which is like super energy intensive, as well as like much more visible than the second step, which is harder to control, which is the proliferation of nuclear grade material. So like here we had a similar situation where the pre-training actually happens just in a few places and is visible to governments. Whereas like the proliferation is already much harder to control. So So yeah, my model is that, and also like it, as I know, it kind of resonates with thinking in the labs themselves. That if you want to kind of have some constraints on the AI trajectory, then kind of intervening in this compute, having some kind of compute governance is probably great thing to start from. And in fact, like this CHIPS Act and like the export controls to China are already things that are happening, and in some ways make the problem much more easier. Although it doesn't, it's far from solving it.
I think that makes sense. I mean, certainly at the moment, the compute requirements are high. I do wonder, what do you make of things like the diffusion of just language model know-how, proliferation? I think we might have a guest coming up on the podcast that is building a decentralized GPU cluster, potentially with some sort of blockchain governance where, my M1 or M2 MacBook Air can like contribute to a cluster. Do you think, like, how long do you think we have before that barrier of just like mega compute resources goes away? Possibly because of these like virtual clusters, or possibly because of like further algorithmic breakthroughs, or just model leaks could be another thing. How long do you think that holds?
I mean, I can refer back to this, like Eliezer's Moore's law of math science. That yep, like with every year or a couple of years, destroying the world becomes easier. So there's that. But also, like, if we do not get a pause, like I do think that the world will be destroyed by one of the big labs. Just because, yeah, the frontier models happen. It's much easier to train frontier models in a big data center than in a distributed manner. That said, if the pause does happen, then yes, we have to worry about things like proliferation, things like hackers stealing the weights and then kind of doing experiments like Chaos GPT, but with a competent AI, stuff like that.
I think one of the maybe most kind of, I don't know if it's an argument or whatever, but maybe one of the things that's kind of hardest to argue with, in my experience, for those that are kind of objecting to the letter or to the concept of a pause, is the sense that, like, someone might say, you're not giving me anything to hope on here, really, right? You're just telling me like every generation it gets easier for the world to get destroyed. Like, we've talked about buying ourselves some time here and there, but we haven't really heard much of a sort of, here is the path we can take to safety. And so, like, why bother pausing if we don't even have a sense of where we're going? Do you have any hopes for concrete paths to safety that you would try to inspire that kind of person with?
Yeah. I mean, sorry, humanity, you have cancer. So it's like, you might be cured of it, but currently it doesn't look good. So it's like, I'm not going to lie. The prognosis is bad. But like, it's not hopeless. And also, like, the kind of like massive silver lining is that if we do manage to survive the cancer, the future is going to be amazing. So, like, in some ways, kind of the expected value of the future is not bad. It's just like the odds of survival are bad. But if we survive, the life, the world, the universe could be potentially like unfathomably better than it is now. So in sense, we are living a lottery ticket, and it is in some way in our control to improve the odds. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, that's probably about as good of a bottom line as we could hope for this conversation. So I want to thank you for spending the time with us. I do have a couple real quick hitter, just fun questions that I usually end on, if you have an extra second for those. We touched on this earlier. Any applications aside from like the obvious, kind of usage of the core language models that you are personally just finding delightful or useful that you would recommend that people check out?
No, I'm just like way kind of bandwidth limited to tinker with the language models. I mean, I've done a little bit, but then I'm trying to find coders at this point to like delegate a bunch of my projects. Some of them might involve language models.
Fair enough. You're in the majority on that answer. Most people are just using a few things. And then second, let's imagine a world where we're here in a couple of years and Neuralink has been deployed to 1 million people. In this scenario, you are well, so you don't need it for restoring any functionality. But if you were to get a Neuralink implant in your head, it would give you the ability to essentially transmit your thoughts to devices. So you would have effectively thought to text or thought to UI control. Would that be enough for you to be interested in getting a Neuralink implant?
Depends so much on details, like how reversible is the procedure, what are the risks, and what is the kind of demonstrated upside. Like, will I become a better dancer as a result?
We'll have to, yeah, that one they did show in their show and tell, they did show an animal where they were creating motor control through the Neuralink, but yeah, I think it was a long way from improving on your dancing skills. So I hope you are dancing for many years to come. Jaan Tallinn, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We appreciate you being part of the cognitive revolution.
Thank you very much.